Joining me now from Tulsa, MSNBC correspondent Trymaine Lee, host of the In America podcast, and NBC White House correspondent Jeff Bennett. Also with us today, Professor Eddie Glaude Jr., chair of the Department of African American Studies at Princeton University, and Carlos Moreno, author of The Victory of Greenwood. The book contains a series of articles examining the origins of the Greenwood community in North Tulsa and how leaders there rebuilt after the horrific events against the black community in June 1921. Trymaine, you've learned so much about this community in Tulsa in recent weeks. You've been on the ground so long. Take us through what is happening today and how this painful anniversary is sparking more calls for action, for reparations, for action by decision makers in Oklahoma.
Andrew, I'll tell you what, today really caps off what has been years in the making, really, this centennial. And as you mentioned, I've spent weeks on the ground here engaging with folks about what this moment means, right? Engaging with the past, unearthing some of those hidden truths that had been buried for so long and how this community could go forward. I had a chance to talk with a number of people in the black community who are dealing with the inherited trauma and pain of this, but also I've talked to a few white people. Very few wanted to talk, but I talked to some white folks about what it means for them to carry a piece of this legacy as well, including Reverend Marlon Lavenar, who is the head of All Souls Church, co-founded by a newspaper publisher who wrote really scathing racist headlines that actually helped spark some of this. Let's take a listen to what Reverend Lavenar had to say.
We have this sort of split in the community right now where you have a lot of people, certainly people in the establishment, and a lot of white people, quite frankly, who think we're in this period of reconciliation finally after 100 years. And then there's a lot of the rest of us who believe that we need to still tell the truth about what happened, and we don't know that truth, particularly as it pertains to the white side of the equation and the perpetrator side. And then we need to do some repair, some reparations of some kind to those who are the descendants and even the few survivors who are left.
Repair and reparations. The calls for reparations is growing louder because there has been a specific kind of injury dealt time and again from the massacre, and every generation that followed has suffered accordingly. And so, as Reverend Lavenar mentioned, folks are still grappling and reckoning with what the truth actually is and the context of that truth. But one thing is clear: the call for reparations, Andrea, is getting loud and clear.
And there's legislation that didn't emanate from Tulsa, legislation that Sheila Jackson Lee, the congresswoman from Texas, has been working on, which is gaining steam even before the focus on Tulsa. So it's all now part of a much larger narrative. Jeff Bennett, so let's talk about that, what we expect to hear from President Biden today. Will he endorse reparations? Is he taking this on? How is he going to handle pressure, frankly, from the Congressional Black Caucus and others, members of the Democratic Progressives?
And Andrea, this is a question I've been asking the White House for days now. Will the president support the specific push for reparations on behalf of these three survivors, the survivors of the Tulsa Race Massacre, with whom he's going to meet in this building here behind me in about a couple hours' time? The White House will only say that the president's position on reparations has not changed, that he supports the study of reparations. But there was a commission here in 2001 that did study it, and they made the determination that financial compensation was warranted for these survivors, and yet not a single penny has been paid. So hopefully we can get some clarity on that specific issue about the compensation that is due to these three survivors as a means of making them whole. These are three amazing folks between the ages of 100 and 107 years old. Now, to coincide with the president's visit here today, the White House has announced a couple of other measures they say are aimed at closing the racial wealth gap. One would make it easier for minority-owned businesses to get access to federal contracts. Another would address financial disparities in the home appraisal process. And to put that into context, why the administration is focused on that, remember, it was just a couple of weeks ago, there was that story from the Bay Area. There was this black couple that had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars renovating their home to put on the market. They got a home appraisal, and they believed that they had been lowballed in their home appraisal. It happened to be an older white woman who did the appraisal. The black couple, believed that there had been a racial element in that interaction. They got a second appraisal. They were approved for a second appraisal. They had their white friends come in and pose as the homeowners, and lo and behold, the second appraisal came back $500,000 higher. And only a matter of weeks had really passed between the first appraisal and the second appraisal. The only thing that was different was the white homeowner, the white stand-in homeowner. So that is why HUD, under the leadership of Secretary Marcia Fudge, is now focused on this issue. And of course, we know that home ownership is the key to financial success, whether you're white, black, or what have you. And so that is how the administration, they say, is focused on the equity piece of this, as the president now becomes the first U.S. president in history to come to Tulsa on this anniversary and to really shine a presidential spotlight and try to lift the silence on what was one of the darkest and frankly most overlooked instances of racial violence in this country, Andrea.
And Carlos Moreno, I've got to tell you that I was just having a deja vu moment because as Jeff was talking, one of my first reports when I was a young radio reporter in Philadelphia was to send out two teams, one black, one white, to try to buy a house in a suburban neighborhood. And our black team of reporters couldn't get a house on the same street that my white partner and I, at the time, colleague, were immediately given a whole series of listings. Now, that was 1968. Tell me that nothing has changed. In San Francisco, of all places, we're not talking about the Deep South. How is this possible in this country?
Well, Andrea, you pointed out something that Greenwood residents still struggle with today. There was a housing ordinance that was passed in the year 1916 by the city government. And what this housing ordinance did is racially segregate the city of Tulsa by law. This ordinance said that 75% or more white families lived in a neighborhood that a black family could not live there. And that ordinance, Andrea, was not repealed until 1963. And so we are but one generation away from legal housing segregation in the city of Tulsa. And the city of Tulsa's own Economic Equality Indicators report shows very clearly in the years 2018, 2019, and 2020, that black families are half as likely to own a home as a white family in this city. So these are the things that citizens in Tulsa have been dealing with for generations now, having their generational wealth stolen from them in 1921, having their generational wealth stolen from them again during the urban renewal era. And those policies and those harms against the black community in Tulsa still reverberate today.
Professor, let's talk about this history and how Americans can be so ignorant, really. White Americans, maybe some black Americans, ignorant of what happened 100 years ago.
Well, Andrew, there's a kind of willful ignorance, and the willful ignorance is aimed at kind of protecting our innocence. You see, we don't want to tell ourselves the truth. I mean, connect this to the arguments around the 1619 Project, the arguments against critical race theory, governors trying to punish school districts who will teach anything that's divisive with regards to our history. And so the idea is that we don't want to confront what we've done because we're comfortable with who we are. And so we clutch our pearls when we have these moments of revelation. Is this who we are? Of course, there are those of us who have lived under the brunt of it all, right? And so when we think about this anniversary of Tulsa, we need to understand it as one among many. Next year, or in 2 years, we will have the anniversary of Rosewood, another event of massacre of this magnitude. And so I think it's really important that President Biden is the first president to acknowledge this, because as Brian Stevenson says, truth and reconciliation is sequential. First, you have to tell the truth, which is a precondition for reconciliation, which is the basis for repair. So we have to confront what we've done, Andrea, honestly, so that we can finally imagine ourselves differently, or we will stay on this hamster wheel for another generation.